The other big thing that we're going to look at today, out of the variety of big things, is what's going on with the CFMEU inquiry. Construction, Forestry, Mining and Electrical Workers Union. We talked about unions and their powers and stuff in the past. We talked about Australia's union history, in unionisation and history, how things came out of the Eureka Stockade and what happened as it went forward, and the role unions and workers' rights have had in shaping how Australian politics has evolved. Then we also talked about how the CFMEU in particular were at loggerheads with the Victorian government during the lockdowns for COVID. Both sides were right, both sides were wrong, but it was a split between the political party that naturally the unions supported and the unions, and that the political party threw it back in the union's face as, well, we don't really need you as such. And obviously there was all sorts of other bits and pieces. Now, the CFMEU has had, or unions have been under investigation in Australia on and off over the decades and years. We've had a variety of unions become very, 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 very strong in their respective workplaces, and worker rights and protections in Australia compared to a lot of other countries are actually really, really, really good. Now, how we got those, you could say, is the result of union activity. The concern, though, is that anytime you let a group of people coalesce and form a group and attract a degree of power, eventually that power will corrupt. Be it government, union, employers, public sector. Anytime that there is the opportunity to have power, eventually that will corrupt. That's why we now have a number of independent, nominally independent, anti-corruption commissions around the place. And we did talk about the issues that the Victorian one was having with the former Victorian Premier, and how that his response to them allowed doubts to be raised about how effective the Victorian anti-corruption system was. The concern with the unions, though, is because certain sectors, basically, you can't work unless you're a union member. It means that the unions control productivity and the ability of those sectors to operate. So there were issues in the past with, say, dock workers and massive strikes that went on, the stevedoring unions and such. It caused basically paralysis at Australian ports because, well, there weren't going to be non-union people working. They weren't going to be brought in like that. In construction, for example, unions, you do have non-union workplaces still, and non-union and service providers, but by and large they're union driven, and because the power tends to corrupt over time, it also attracts organised crime. And traditionally it's a liberal, so the Liberals, the political party, the Conservative Party, that has issues with unions, and in the past they've been seen as union busting and all that sort of stuff. And so if people are going to inquire through an inquiry into the behaviour of a union or the power or anything like that, or an inquiry, people will generally see that it's a Liberal government that does it. The Labor governments tend to look the other way a bit. But there's been fracturing between unions and their political partners, with some groups thinking they've got more power than they have. So Queensland, which I believe is now a Liberal government, has launched into their Commission of Inquiry into the CFMEU and misconduct in the construction industry, i.e. presence of organised crime, standover people, all sorts of horrible things, which, I mean, one of the reasons unions were brought in was because, well, workers' rights non-existent. They had no ability to collectively bargain and get fair pay for fair work and all that sort of stuff. The issue with how once a union becomes too powerful is that they can almost set rates, and if organised crime's involved, then all sorts of kickbacks and all sorts of stuff goes on. It's not pleasant for anyone. And so part of the concern here about misconduct in the construction industry is that the union has prevented natural productivity gains or improvements to come into the sector or onto work sites because they're blocking it. And so it's costing, construction is costing more, it's taking longer, all sorts of stuff. Now, you don't want to cut corners and lose on safety. I mean, the union's got a great role in helping ensure worksite safety and that employers don't take shortcuts. But they've been running around, the union's been running around as without oversight, effectively. So, yeah, there've been allegations, I mean, these always appear, systemic violence, intimidation, misogyny, and bullying within you. I'm surprised they lumped that in with systemic violence and intimidation of union behaviour. I mean, is misogyny within a union enough to warrant a silk to do a report and then lead to an inquiry? I mean, I guess it depends on how bad it is. I mean, and bullying within the union, okay, yep. It's kind of not taken as is, but it's half assumed. Bipartisan support from the opposition leader and former premier. So both sides are saying, look, you guys have gone too far. Only 55 people were interviewed when the Silk did his report, with many critical witnesses refusing to speak for fear of retribution, which doesn't do anything to dissuade the idea that organised crime or crime is heavily involved in the union and what the union does, and which then also leads to questions about corruption as well. So inquiries in Australia, depending on inquiries and commissions and royal commissions, they have slightly different powers, and they also have different powers if they're led by state or Commonwealth level. But at in the form it's being run here, they have the power to compel documents and witnesses, as well as provide protection for witnesses. So if somebody is believed to have information pertinent to the conduct of the inquiry, they can be compelled to appear. And if they don't, then it is actually, is it criminal? It's not civil. I'm almost certain. I mean, it's in the legislations. I had to look at government agencies, inquiries and commission type things not long back. I mean, royal commissions are very, very interesting what they can do. Now, some, again, depending on the type of inquiry and everything else, it may not be able to direct outcomes. In other words, it may not be able to say, you will be charged with this. They can make recommendations. So the inquiry might recommend that a witness who failed to appear could be prosecuted for whatever the actual breach is, and then it's up to the Crown, the prosecution service, whatever it is, whichever state it is, to decide to proceed or not, and to provide protection for witnesses. Yeah, see, I don't know. I think a lot of people are very suspect about what that might represent. The idea is that you want to make work sites safe and productivity continue. I mean, it's a fair statement to make, but people being afraid to come and talk suggests the powers and the corruption's too entrenched. The Labor's Fitzgerald moments. there were some very, very big police corruption and misconduct inquiries in the late 80s and the 90s. My own personal belief is that the New South Wales corruption inquiries, police corruption inquiries, were the impetus for New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption to be established. And to my mind, it's been probably one of the better commissions, anti-corruption commissions. And certainly they had some really, really good successes early on, which sort of sold the rest of the country on the importance of having something like that. And they went after everybody too. I mean, top politicians were no longer immune from being questioned or even charged. But yeah, no, there were, in Queensland and New South Wales in particular, they had some really, really big problems with police corruption. Victoria, to a lesser extent, but no, New South Wales and Queensland very much so. And for people who remember those timeframes, it's possibly and quite probable influenced how the last federal election turned out, because Peter Dutton, who was the opposition leader at the time, the Liberal leader at the time, had formerly been a Queensland cop. And when you look at it, when he served and everything else, there is a lingering suspicion that him being active at that time in Queensland Police, no one came out of that clean. But I think those allegations were either largely unproven or basically left to the dustbin of history. Yeah, so there's still flow-on effects. I mean, even the recent, I don't know if it's an ICAC or government-led thing, the New South Wales, it might have been an inquiry into gay hate crimes in, again, through the 70s, 80s, early 90s maybe, and the response of New South Wales Police to that tied into the corruption as well, and vice in and around King's Cross and all those sort of bits and pieces. Yeah, grounds for lots of corruption. Oh, it's great entertainment. Not corruption is entertainment, but these inquiries are great entertainment. Pity they come too late for victims, but so this is one that, I mean, okay, so Queensland going after them because they're a conservative government. Well, you know, well, people say, well, that's fair enough. The bit that stands out to me is the fact it was the federal government, as they are now, who placed the union, or the construction branches, the C part of the CFMEU, into administration. That's a Labor government placing a union into administration. So, which implies that there's that breakdown of that relationship between them. Something's obviously gone on in the back rooms that is now playing out in the front rooms. So that was the hearing actually began 20th. What's the date on the article? The 18th. Sorry. So it began. And there's all sorts of stuff coming out left, right, and centre. Now, is it all related to the hearing? Who knows? But because they're related to the union, it becomes an issue. So this is the week before the former CFMEU boss, John Setka. Now, he and the new Victorian Premier, Dan Andrews, had a bit of a falling out during COVID. And Setka was, well, certainly very vocal and very publicly present in support of the union and his union members. And yet, the idea that he's been arrested and charged over allegedly threatening and harassing emails sent to a union administrator. Okay, so that previous article said federal government a Labor government, had placed the construction arms under administration. Now, is that administrator in terms of somebody who works in administration within the union, or are we talking about an administrator appointed as part of the union being placed into administration? I think the second. So, high-profile firm union figure, yep, interviewed and charged 7 counts of a device to menace, harass, and offend. Doesn't do anything to, again, dissuade people from the idea that senior union figures are violent. Or potentially linked to even worse people. Administration. So it seems like the administrator sent a notice to say, hey, give us some information, and he responded in a not so nice manner to tell him to presumably go take a hike. So again, there's another task force to probe alleged criminal behaviour within the construction industry. So you notice that in the Queensland Commission, there was no talk about links of alleged criminal behaviour. But I'm sure they're going to come to the surface. I mean, it may be entirely possible. I've not read the Commission's, there's a word for it. Basically, there's a document that is formed as part of a commission or an inquiry that sets the boundaries on what can and cannot be looked at. And a statement of... I forget the name of it. But basically, it could be that the commission in the inquiry in Queensland cannot ask about alleged crime links. They're not permitted to, because that's not part of their remit. And if it comes up, it's to be ignored. Potential. I doubt it, though. Blah, blah, blah. Yep, you can anonymously report. We will not tolerate behaviour that aims to intimidate and harass people who simply want to be able to go to work and perform their job to the best of their ability. In basically that's saying, well, we don't agree with what the union's doing to you. Setka quit the CFMEU in 2024 after allegations of criminal conduct were made by 60 Minutes and The Age. So The Age being the Melbourne equivalent of the Sydney Morning Herald, all part of the same media group. He decided to step down to stop the barrage and all the false accusations about the scandal-riddled union. Yep. Okay, well, apparently it was because of organised crime, at least according to Channel 9 here. Okay, so there's other stuff which is now coming out. Well, also coming out. And this sort of stuff's been around again for years. It's been seen, always sort of happened. Good job. Anyone who wants to be like that, we'll skip their stuff. They're also coming out of the inquiry. I mean, we're going to sort of rocket through it slightly. Is the idea of these slush funds, where they're taking members' funds that are basically to support the cost of running the union, and funds are being redirected to support election campaigns or re-election campaigns for senior union members. Now, again, it's always sort of happened, and this is where the line between political parties and what the unions do gets very, very blurred. Now, if it's made clear that that's what's going to go on, I think, and it's voted upon and it's supported by the members, I don't think people have an issue with it. It's when it's done hidden, or in opposition to what the union stands for, that becomes a bigger problem. G'day, Silly Menjo. I missed the question there. CFMEU. Okay. Uh, I did say it at the start. CFMEU is the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Electrical Workers Union. I think it was initially several smaller unions, but they became, in essence, a mega union. And if you think about it, the construction, building sites, commercial, residential, industrial, whatever, basically, you get a hammer and nails and you're trying to build something, construction. Forestry, you're logging, all that sort of stuff. Mining, well, that's obviously a big one. And electrical workers. So I'm not 100% if it's specifically sparkies, like your domestic electricians, but certainly electric production. So you're looking at your large industries in Australia. It makes sense to have a union focused on workers, but it's rather a bit broad. But you can see a common thread there that okay, that sort of a union of those sort of industries makes sense. What was it? The Stevedores Union? I forget if they had another name. They were the ones responsible for the dock workers when the dock worker strikes happened. There's SWU, Shop Workers Union. Like, if you go to Coles or Woolies, the workers there have two possible unions that they could be part of. Or I don't think they can be both. And those two unions don't like each other. I think one's the SW, Shop Workers Union, and the other one's I can't remember. But I do know that, for example, retail workers have two unions that are at each other's throats. Because each argues that the other's not doing the right job looking after their people. Health workers have a couple. It's a bit hard when you're looking at some of them to work out if it's a union or just an industry group. There's a very fine line between some of them. Public sector workers, public servants, have the APSU, the Australian Public Service Union. Depending on what state you're in, there used to be teachers' unions as well. Now, these weren't, they also offered, they used to run their own credit unions, help manage pensions, all the good things that a union should be doing. Although a lot of the time they sort of got a bit too political. Firefighters have their own union as well. So a lot of the time it's there to ensure collective bargaining, make sure that award wages are established, that wage cases are argued, with the workers having a pretty good representation of what's going on. And most people don't have issues with things like that. Like, most unions don't have too many problems. And when problems do arise, they tend to be at these higher levels where administration staff who may never have had set foot on the shop floor running the place, and the corruption and misdirection of funds tends to happen at these higher levels. The CFMEU has been a problem on and off for a while, and yet now there's attention being turned to it, and it's going to have some pretty flow-on effects. So yeah, I've been calling it the CFMEU the whole time because that's what it is. I did describe it when I flopped over, but no, you're right. If you didn't understand it, ask. United Workers Union, another union there. Childhood education, aged care, hospitality, and manufacturing. UWU might be the one I was trying to think of. First for the shops. Now, in Australia, a compulsory unionisation is an interesting thing. Like, I don't think it's... I'd have to have a look. The industries I worked in, it was not compulsory. And in fact, we didn't have one, I don't think. But there are places where compulsory unionisation still exists, and that's university students. So the student union is, well, largely seen as the bar on campus where people go to drink, and university co-op and things like that. But university students still have compulsory unionisation, which is kind of funny because it is also used as a political tool. But I don't think that you've got to compulsory unionise in order to work elsewhere. The dock workers, I don't know if they still are, or if they ever fully were, but it seemed for a while that you couldn't work on the docks unless you carried your union ticket. And in construction and stuff like that, there are still non-union workplaces and non-union contractors and service providers, but to my understanding, the practical implementation, especially if you're going to go work on a larger job site, is if you don't hold a ticket, you don't work. So if you can't not show your ticket in terms of your qualifications, if you don't have your union ticket, you're not permitted to work that site. Now, how legal that is and everything else, I'm not 100% sure. And that comes back into this whole argument as to, well, has the influence of the union become too much? Particularly if you're allowing shop stewards or site stewards to effectively act in a standover role over people who are non-union in an effort to exclude them from the worksite, or otherwise, it's coercion and violence and all the other bits and pieces. Yeah, there's so many threads to follow coming out of this. Yep, so this is about misusing union funds to run election campaigns, etc. So, and they've had no confirmation someone should kicked out, and it's, close to $1 million. It's cheap for political grandstanding, but yeah, you're talking about rather low-paid workers. They're not going to be happy. So it's all sorts of fun stuff. And as it says here, the particular union, not the CFMEU, had previously been questioned during previous commissions, and it's coercion here. Employers' support for fundraiser linked to future cooperation for the union. In other words, if you don't come to our fundraiser, we're not going to support your attempts to do things. So there's coercion and frustration and everything else. It's not fun. The first week, though, of the inquiry, now we're going to avoid one of those sources because they've said I've used up all my time. The first week is now complete of this CFMEU inquiry. And we're at the point where, there's some big stuff. The Silk that wrote the initial report was like, no, there's no issues with it. It's a storm in a teacup. In other words, this is political grandstanding by a political party that is notoriously anti-union, and therefore this is just a stitch-up job to bring the union back into line or exert more power over the union, strip rights away from workers, blah, 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 blah. Only then to realise, wait a second, all these allegations people have been making, there's merit to them. And in a 45-page report now, that's got to be it's from a Silk, but 45 pages to hit down on so many aspects of core culture and other issues, cultural violence, etc. 45 pages to kick off an inquiry. That's, irrespective of the content of what it's for or the specifics, That's got to be a government document or a policy, not a policy document. That's got to be a report worth reading, if nothing else, to see how well he's consolidated his findings into. I mean, I've read documents where the executive summary was 45 pages. So, okay. So what have we seen from the first week? That they've apparently had plans to expel former leaders from it. Oh, g'day, third string. Norris, mate. Thank you. So, disciplinary procedures and processes that could expel high-profile CFMEU officials. That's fair enough. I mean, this is from the administrator. So this is when the government appointed the administrator. Well, okay, if you're appointed, if a business goes into administration, I don't know if it's the same process in other countries around the world. Receivership, administration, kind of a very similar sort of thing. But the administrator will be appointed certain tasks. I mean, they've got to administrate the business, but it may be to wind the business up. It may be to replace the management team. It may be to, like, I guess in a bankruptcy, restructure the business or something like that. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things they could do, and I'm sure there's a remit for it. So the administrator that's been given the remit presumably has powers and processes to basically kick out higher ups that are causing issues, that are blocking things. Well, I mean, that kind of makes sense. And that as long as there's like internal processes to support it and validate it, perfectly fine. No real issues. Obviously, there's going to be people taking issue, i.e. the senior management of the CFMEU are probably going to be like, hey, wait a second, leave me alone. I'm not taking too many issues. The idea, and then this is this assumption or this viewpoint that a lot of people have in general, that there are people within the unions that are running them as their own personal kingdoms or fiefdoms, and that you've got these people who may never have actually set foot on workplaces, or were only there very, very temporarily, because effectively becoming politicians and rising up the union power structure. That, the power corrupts. I mean, this is at the national level too. So the Queensland leadership team, which is the inquiry sort of focused on, the administrator has Australia-wide powers. So he's also looking at expelling leaders in other states. Now, John Setka, we just saw that other article about him being arrested. And again, there had been a previous investigation alleging that Setka had allowed organised crime interests to penetrate the union, and that how things happen. Now, that it hadn't happened in Queensland, that's a brave statement to make without an investigation having taken place. He says, well, it was violence, not organised crime, but the two of them tend to go hand in hand, though. I find that hard to separate, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised if it does show up that there is a link. I mean, probably not as much as in Victoria. I'll give them that. But to say that it was not, maybe the organised criminals were the CFMEU leadership. We'll see. Because of how big the union has become and how broad it is, shutting down the union altogether would trigger chaos and massive industrial disruption. Well, basically, a collective, I mean, it's meant to collectively represent the worker, but you can just imagine It'd be like if a major political party just suddenly ceased to exist whilst outside of an election. So, for example, I mean, we've had political parties shut down in Australia before, but it'd be like Labor or the Liberals just ceasing to exist. Or maybe in the US example, imagine if the Democratic Party just one day didn't exist. And so Congress wakes up one day and goes to work and wait a second, there's no one on the other side of the aisle. Or it suddenly fractured into the same number of independents. And because now there's no longer a collective bargaining, no longer a collective representation. I mean, it won't take long for a union to re-establish some form of union to establish itself. But in that time frame, yeah, there's the potential for massive disruption. And more opportunities for organised crime. I don't know. If they were doing it, they're probably already doing it. So what else had happened? More misuse of union fees, although this time 50 million. That's quite a bit. And that how they managed to hide that money was that it went to state branches, not federal, or not the national overseeing body, which meant that it was sort of hidden at state level. So the CFMEU then bought a swathe of properties. And even worse, left members unregistered. Oh, that's like it's almost like a reverse branch stacking. Now, we talked about branch stacking. We looked at Victorian politics before. That's where they bring in people who don't normally live in an area to vote on the pre-selection of a candidate for a seat by the party, and so they basically stack the branch with people who will vote a certain way, so that their preferred candidate gets the seat, and then gets the nomination, and therefore runs for the seat. It's like, okay. Although in this case, what they've done is they've disenfranchised up to 20,000 members of the union from being able to have a say in the direction of the union. That's not insignificant. That's amazing. And the fact that they kept it secret. Ooh. And this is only week 1. Power was a potential motivator. Yeah, we talked about that. Then there were people who were linked with crime in certain ways. I do like how the news outlets have to present facts or statements in regards to crime. That a relative of a union member, person X, drove officials to meetings with the investigator and provided them with tape recorders. That was interesting. The driver has since been charged with torture and murder in an unrelated manner. Which is like, well, what? They're an angel before that? They were a saint and did nothing wrong? It's sort of like, well, they've been charged with these horrible behaviours. Is the implication that they were possibly doing these horrible behaviours before, or inclined to that, or... Yeah. Okay, so there's coercive control, attempts to prevent people from talking, emulated Victorian Power campaign. Yep, so SECA. Australian Workers' Union. Now, they, used to be really, really powerful as well. But the CFMEU isn't the only union out there to cover these sectors. So the AWU, whilst it's smaller, also involved in those sort of workplaces and everything else. And so you've got these power plays on the work site as Well, in this case, the CFMEU has attempted to push out other unions and make it a single union workplace or work site. Or therefore, if it's going to be a single union work site, and people want to work in the industry, then they've got to come and join that union, and therefore they control that industry. Ooh, and that, yes, it has economic factors, and that, yep, you're the one union with all the power, the negotiating tools, where availability of skilled workers is difficult. It's and then you've got the issue of violence, implied or otherwise, and standover actions on work sites. And I mean, with people with cameras on their phones, it's a lot easier to capture this now. It's a lot harder in the past. It happened in the past as well. But how the union has basically kept the work site to itself can often be very close to the line of legality. And here they're using aggressive behaviour towards rival union members and non-union workers to try and coerce them off the work site. And so, yeah, in internal disputes, and well, see, this is an interesting claim, which then goes to police corruption as well, of that the police were not going to respond to these sort of disputes, even if they went violent, if the CFMEU had been involved. That seems the police union president. Okay, so union. I find it offensive and outrageous any insinuation suggesting police who have sworn an oath to disrupt and stop criminal behaviour would not act where required by law and jeopardise their own integrity, says the representative of a police union in a state that had very, very, very significant police corruption in the past. Yeah. All right. So, yeah, there's all sorts of interesting coming out of it. And the next, as it says here, the next bunch of public hearings will be first week of December, so that's next week. Hang on. Yes. Yes, next week. Today's only Tuesday. I thought Thursday. Already forgotten what day it is. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. Again, there was stuff from back in COVID where, yeah, CFMEU certainly seemed to be, if not doing the right thing, getting a lot of support for their attempts to push back on the severity of the lockdowns and to stand up to the government in Victoria. I think a lot of people sort of gave them credit for that and said, look how good the union's been. A bit more self-serving than that. And it's going to be one of these cyclical things. We're going to probably see this will settle down, then another 15 or 20 years, we'll have another set of inquiries where it'll be, yep, the union's corrupted itself again, or we'll be looking at another union or other things where people have applied, well, again, people seeking power and gaining power, then corrupting because of it. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of article links that I'll put up when I put up the YouTube video later on, that'll run through all of the links that, well, I mean, a lot of them say pretty much the same thing, but it's important to see that this is something that is, well, going to be sitting on top of the news or towards the top of the news heap in Australia for a while. And the importance of what comes out of it. Again, the industries represented are not small industries, and obviously there's places where, I mean, this now ties into like those infrastructure issues and construction and all those other bits and pieces. It's going to have an impact on all of those as well. It's not just isolated to the few people doing bad things here. There could be some very serious consequences to those broader concepts. Or not concepts, broader efforts to do things.